I distinctly remember meeting Jim and Linda Werner. I remember thinking immediately, wow, what an intentional couple. Would you agree with me? And shortly, Linda, after meeting the two of you, I thought to myself, if I were to compare Jim and Linda Werner to a roller coaster ride at a theme park, Jim would be the chink, 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 rising ever higher, and Linda would be the woo, baby. I think that's pretty accurate. So when I wrote the book, Nurturing the Leader in Your Child, I did not write it as some sort of guru or sage or expert, but I was asking myself the question, what would it look like if teachers and parents were to raise children with the question, what would it look like if we raise kids with a leadership bias, where they had the assumption inside of them, what would it look like if I, taking my gifts and passions and strengths, were to lead or to influence other people? Now, by asking that question, I was not suggesting we need to turn kids into something they're not. In fact, quite the opposite. We would be turning them into something they really were. With the gifts inside of them, what would it look like if the best version of themselves came out? So, what I'm not saying by saying kids are leaders, I'm not saying that we have to make it a matter of position. Meaning, I don't think you have to have a position to be a leader. In fact, I think leadership has less to do with a position and more to do with a disposition. It's about finding out what needs to be done and then applying my best self to those things. So it doesn't mean I have to be the president or the chairman or the CEO, but simply find what's inside of me and then leveraging it to influence in the world in a positive way. Secondly, I don't think leadership means power. In fact, Jesus taught us quite eloquently that it isn't about power, but just the opposite. It's about service. It's about leveraging whatever I have to serve other people. So it isn't about power, but about empowering other people. And then lastly, I wasn't saying that leadership meant it was about personality. Don't you think that very often when we think of a leader, we think it has to be some sort of temperament, that you have to be a take charge, driver, driven, type A person. And I don't think that's true at all. In fact, some of my favorite leaders are introverts, not extroverts. They're people that just quietly get things done behind the scenes. So think about this passage of Scripture. It's in your notes, but I want you to think about it in a fresh way with me. In Matthew 4:19, Jesus said, "Follow me, and I will make you," what was it? "Fishers of men." Meaning, if you stick with me long enough, I'm going to turn you into influencers of people. You will be influenced, you will follow, and you'll never stop following, ever, in your life. But along the way, if you mature in me, you will start influencing people. And the book, Nurturing the Leader in Your Child, was just about the second half of that verse. What does it look like to be fishers of men? To be thermostats, not just thermometers. Rivers, not floods. Drivers, not passengers. And we developed a whole curriculum about using these images that help kids just think about the second half of that verse. So in the few minutes I have with you, I'd like to talk to you briefly, whether you're an educator, a parent, or both, to talk to you about the four most common ways that I see kids emerging, finding that leader inside of them. And by the way, let me just hasten to add, I believe there's a leader inside of every kid. Maybe not a positional leader, maybe not the CEO or the president or the chairman, but that leader that's going to influence in the world in a positive way. So there may be 400 ways, I've found 4. Here we go. The first one is, and probably this is the most obvious one that you can see right away, some kids are gifted to lead. They're the most obvious ones because they're the ones with the personality that I just mentioned before. They want to take charge, whether they're right or wrong, they think they're right, okay? They're the driver child, they're the, get ready, sometimes ready, fire, aim, but they're the ones that just want to take charge, okay? You spot them on the playground right away. They're in kindergarten, they're taking over the kickball team, okay? They just think they've got a plan and everybody ought to follow the plan. For 20 years of my career, I worked, it was an undeserved privilege, I worked with Dr. John C. Maxwell. I was his student pastor. John Maxwell is a natural leader. He's a gifted leader. He was gifted to lead. I'm sure, in fact, I heard during elementary school, he was paying other kids to write papers for him. That was just John Maxwell, okay? fact, I think he paid me to write papers for him during his master's degree. But anyway, that's another story. Some of you have children that are gifted to lead. And I believe we need to pull them aside and say to them, this is a stewardship. This is something you owe other people, to leverage this gift you have to serve other people. You owe it to people around you to use this gift. Amen? Those are the gifted ones. Those are the most obvious ones, but that's probably a very, very, very small percentage of kids. Let me give you the other three real quick. The second way kids emerge as leaders is some of them are situated to lead. Now, there's a number of us that believe there's two kinds of leaders in the world. I've bought into this. There's two kinds of leaders in the world. There are habitual leaders and there are situational leaders. Habitual and situational. The habitual leaders are the ones I just talked to you about. They're the ones that are gifted to lead. They lead out of habit. Whatever team they're on, whatever group they're in, they just tend to take charge. And again, that's a very small percentage. Maybe 10 to 15% of the population would be habitual leaders. But the situational leaders, the other 85 to 90% of us, are the ones that would say, I'm not really a great leader, but put us in the right situation, one that matches our gifts and passions and strengths. In that one sweet spot, we're really good. We naturally influence other people. We're confident in that area, that situation. We're comfortable in that situation. We're influential in that situation. And I believe the job of us as caring adults is to help our kids find their God-given situation. And when they find it, we don't have to even give them a badge. They'll be taken over. Haven't you all seen that quiet kid, a boy or girl, that's just kind of a wallflower, but then you put him on the soundboard or you put him over here, and suddenly it's like, what happened to him, you know? Well, he's found his situation. My daughter Bethany and my son Jonathan are both situational leaders. My daughter Bethany is the perfect example of this. She could be voted the least likely to be a leader all through her K-12 education. I mean, she was a chill girl, just chill. Her favorite word in middle school was whatever. If I wanted to get her to clean up her room, I'd say, Bethany, don't you want a clean room? She'd go, not really. I mean, that was her response. And she was honest, whatever. But I'm telling you, once we began to talk about this idea and we began to talk about situations, I mean to tell you, she began to find situations throughout high school that she just came alive. Now, she didn't organize a whole team or she didn't come up with a strategy, but when she found situations, she naturally led. I'll never forget during her 4 years in college, she would call me at least once every year during her 4 years to say this, Dad, I think I found my situation this year. My son Jonathan, the same thing. Very, very much a chill kid. But he found some areas that when he was put in those areas, he was the natural leader for those areas. So I'm just saying, if you're raising or teaching kids and they don't look like a natural leader, help them find a situation and get out of their way. The third way kids rise into leadership, I believe, if they're not gifted to lead or situated to lead, some kids are positioned to lead. Meaning there are some kids that they would never have the audacity to step into a leadership position on student council or team captain or you name it. But if you approach them and you say, I'm going to give you the authorization, I'm going to give you the badge, I need you to do this, suddenly they rise to the occasion. Richard was an example of a positional leader. Richard entered our college department when I was a pastor in San Diego, and I noticed right away that he was a very comfortable, natural person, and I thought, boy, if I could put him in charge of one of our small groups, he'd be brilliant. And so I approached him 1 week after he started in our department. I said, Richard, I need you to lead one of our small groups. Well, you would have thought I'd just ask him to rob a bank. No, never, ever, I will never do that, and he's just, I apologize. I said, I'm so sorry if I offended you, But I knew I was right. I knew Richard would one day be a great small group leader. So I backed off and instead said, Richard, I know you don't want to lead a small group. Would you at least be in a small group? He said, well, I'm really shy. I'm really introverted. I don't really talk much. I said, I know. You don't have to say a thing. Just go. Just show up. You'll love these people. So I finally persuaded him to go to a small group. Well, that fall semester, as he's attending every week these small groups, he's loving it. In fact, in December, I said, Richard, did you enjoy it? He goes, oh my gosh, BFF, these are my best friends, these are great. And so I said, Richard, I knew you'd love them. I said, in the spring, I know you don't want to lead a small group. Would you be an apprentice? He said, what's an apprentice? I said, it's just the person that helps the leader. They just make sure and email everybody and make sure they know what time they're meeting and who brings us snacks. He goes, I can do that. Well, you see what I'm doing already, don't you? He's now the apprentice. Well, twice during that spring semester, the small group leader can't show up, can't make the meeting. Guess who has to lead? Richard does. He's brilliant. By the next fall, Richard is leading a small group. And when I moved away from San Diego, Richard was the leader of the small group leaders. I think he did okay. If he were here tonight, you know what he would say? He would say, I didn't think I could do it. But when Pastor Tim asked me, I just knew I had to do it. He was positioned to lead. From that point on, Richard was leading something because someone saw something and authorized him to do it. He would have never signed up himself. But when someone else said, I need you to do it, he rose to the occasion. Some of your kids out there are going to be positioned leaders. And someone, maybe you, need to say, I've got a badge for you. Now, the fourth and final way I think kids surface in leadership, some are gifted to lead. They're the natural ones. It's a stewardship. Some are situated to lead. You need to help them find that situation. Some are positioned to lead. You need to give them a badge. But my favorite one is the fourth one. It's my favorite because I think it's the one that calls out leadership in kids in the purest way, the most natural, authentic, genuine way. Some kids are summoned to lead. They're summoned to lead. By that I mean it has little to do with a badge, maybe never. It's not the conventional way where there's some organization and they have a role to play or a place to serve. But this person is summoned to lead by a problem, a crisis, some challenge. Something goes awry. And sometimes it shows up first as a negative emotion. They get angry and upset, or they're sad about something. In fact, whenever a student comes to me and they're ticked off, I always think to myself, good, glad you're ticked off. Means you care. What is it you care about? And I try to call them out and have them go do something about it. But when a kid is summoned to lead, it's because they see some unjust situation out there, and somehow it's beckoning someone to do something. And they may not lead 1,000 people at first, but they just step out and do something themselves. And along the way, they start giving permission to others to step in. Probably one of my favorite stories of this, I think it's a picture of this, comes from American history. If you know anything about U.S. history in the 20th century, you know the name Harry Truman. Harry Truman was one of our presidents, probably during one of the darkest hours of 20th century history, World War II. Harry Truman grew up on a farm in Missouri. He was kind of a nerdy kid. He had big, thick glasses that looked like the bottom of Coca-Cola bottles. And he was kind of made fun of by his classmates at school. But when Harry Truman finally finished school, he went off to college, but he never finished. His father got sick while he was away at college, and he had to come home to work the farm. He was one of the only presidents of the 20th century that never finished college. But as a young adult, as a young man, Harry Truman went away, signed up to fight for America during World War I. And while he was away in Europe during the dark days of World War I, the Germans started dropping something from the sky. Everyone in his troops started running in fear, just retreat, absolute terror. Harry Truman had a horse fall over on top of him. It was a miracle he didn't die right then and there. But when he squirmed up from under the horse, he saw the rest of his troops running in fear. He yelled out at the top of his lungs, "Stop, get back here. We've not finished our mission." I think everybody was so amazed that this nerdy guy with 4 eyes was calling them back that they all stopped dead in their tracks. And one by one, they started coming back, and they finished their mission that night. Harry Truman wrote in his journal that night before he went to bed, "I learned 2 things about myself today. Number 1, I had a little courage. And number 2, I really like to lead." And from that point on, young Harry Truman was on a trajectory of leadership. Later ended up in the Oval Office in the White House, leading the United States of America. I believe inside of every kid, There is one day going to come a day where they are summoned to lead. May not be a badge or a position or a title, but some problem will rise up and they will realize that really leadership in its essence is about solving problems and serving people. Solving problems and serving people. Solving problems and serving people. That's what I believe we need to raise up kids to do, whether they have a badge or not, to lead in some way. So I'd like to close my time with a short video. It's just about 1.5 minutes, but it's the challenge we're now giving to students everywhere we go at Growing Leaders. We're calling it Onefluence. It's the word one and influence together. We're going after 1% of the world's population of youth, 25 and under, to enable them, to equip them to think and act like life-giving leaders. So if we have the video queued up, this is Onefluence, this is the challenge. It's on the screens.
There are billions in the world. And then there's you. You've been told that you're powerful and that you can change the world. And you can. But you don't know where to start. You know you can't just sit back and watch, but you try, and you're not getting very far. Because being 1 in a billion actually makes it pretty hard to get anything done. But history shows that real change always starts small, and rarely starts alone. In 1428, a teenager named Joan of Arc influenced a handful of people to act. Days later, she led just 3,000 people into a battle that changed France forever. In 1787, 12 people in a print shop used posters and persistence to start a grassroots movement, which led to the end of slavery in England. And in 1965, just 600 people joined Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in the historic march from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama for equal rights in America. In total, the civil rights movement only included about 1% of the United States population. In fact, if just 1% of us joined together, no, not that 1%, this 1%, we can change 100% of anything. The moment you decide to join those who are taking action, you become a leader for those to come. This is called Onefluence. We are a community of doers, like you, who are coming together to make the world better. And if you don't know where to start here. Because a small group of committed individuals is the only thing that has ever changed the world. History is expecting you. Onefluence.